Good morning, Sharks. I am Jonathan Little. Today, we are going to be discussing the perfect way to play in the big blind. This is a big topic. It's a difficult topic. It's a topic that gives a whole lot of players a whole lot of trouble. So we're going to discuss it today for all of you to ensure you are not making common mistakes over and over and over and over and over again. It's been a little while since I've streamed from this setup, so if you all can hear me, please let me know. Everything looks good, though. So, a lot of people want to know, very simply, what do you do in the big blind? Do you fold a lot? Do you call a lot? Do you re-raise a lot? Well, it depends, which is the answer to most poker questions. So, both pre-flop and post-flop, your strategy is going to depend on a lot of things. First, the structure of the game. What does that mean? Well, is there a rake? Is there an ante? Is it a bomb pot? Are there payout implications in a tournament? Are there multiple blinds, etc., 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 right? You want to consider all the different structural changes that could happen in the game. The most common structural changes are that in a regular cash game, rake is going to come out of every pot, which makes the post-flop pots effectively smaller, which means you're getting worse odds before the flop to defend your big blind, because if you call and see the flop, some amount of the pot just vanishes. In some games, it may be 5%. In some games, it may be 10%. In some games, it may be more. And you need to account for that. Also, is there going to be an ante? In cash games, quite often there is no ante, but in a tournament, very often there is an ante, which effectively makes the pot bigger, right? Because there's roughly an extra big blind in the pot, which means you get to defend wider. If there are payout implications, if you're the player who can go broke and you're on the bubble, you got to be really, really tight because you don't want to go broke on the bubble of a tournament. Or if you're at the final table, the strategy is going to change a lot. We're not going to get into how to play when there are big payout implications today. That is a whole nother broad topic. We discuss it thoroughly at pokercoaching.com, though, so make sure you check that out. Next, the stack depths are relevant. You can't just defend the same range from the big blind in all situations, assuming everything is the same except for the stack sizes, because as the stack depths change, you can potentially win or lose more or less money, right? And that will change your ranges. We'll take a look at that. Next, the number of players in the pot matters a lot. You're going to find that as more players enter the pot, like when it goes raise and call, hands without implied odds become very bad. You may be able to defend the King X offsuit against a raise in a lot of scenarios, but you certainly cannot when there's a raise and a call, because if you make a pair, it's way less likely to be good. Next, the raiser's range is very, very important. Against wider ranges, you defend wider. Against tighter ranges, you defend tighter, right? And also the raiser's general strategy. If your opponent has some sort of big flaw in their game, maybe they're way too tight or way too loose, or maybe they only bet after the flop when they have a good hand, or maybe they never bluff the river. Any sort of thing like that should affect your strategy. And essentially, as your opponent is going to let you see the showdown more often, because they're just going to check a lot after the flop, that will allow you to defend wider and wider. The Pied Piper of pre-flop strategy. Well, this also applies to post-flop. We're going to go into some post-flop scenarios as well. You may say, this is all fine and good. How do we actually learn this? Well, we are going to study using Peak GTO. That is the game theory optimal solver we've developed recently. We're going to look at a bunch of common scenarios. So here we have Peak GTO. First, I want to look at a cash game. Let's say we are playing a cash game, 8-handed, no ante, 100 big blinds deep. All right, let's say the under the gun player raises, everyone folds, and we're in the big blind. You may not like this, but this is a spot that we have to play very, 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 very tightly. The hands in red are re-raised, the hands in green are called, everything else folds. Now you may say, why in the world would we ever play this tight? No one in my games plays this tight. Well, this presumes the under the gun player is playing perfectly. And if we click back over here to under the gun, take a look at what they should be raising with. Notice they should be raising quite tight because there's no ante, there's a rake taken out of every pot, And they have to worry about all the other players waking up with a random hand. So for that, or a random good hand, right? So for that reason, they have to play very tightly. So whenever it folds around you in the big blind, yes, you only have to put in 2 more big blinds, but that doesn't allow you to play all sorts of trash because there's no ante, there's a rake, and you're against a strong range. Okay? How about if instead the button raised? Let's say it folds around to the player on the button and they raise with this range, which is far wider than the under the gun player. Remember, under the gun was raising with 11% of hands. Button gets to raise with 40% of hands, right? So now look at how much wider you get to defend. Now you get to re-raise way more often, and you get to call way more often. Now, you still don't get to call all sorts of offsuit trash. King 8, Queen 9, 10-8, 9-8, 8-7, all of these are not good enough to play, which may be surprising to a lot of people. Again, they think they can call with anything from the big blind. But you have to realize, out of position, you are going to under-realize your equity, meaning when you make a pair, say you defend with the 8-6 offsuit, and it comes Ace, King, 6. You check, your opponent bets, they call. Or you check, they bet, you call. Say the turn's any other card that's not an 8 or 6. You check, they bet again. It's a pretty bad spot. We can actually study this. Let's see what happens. Do you have to end up folding out your pair? Say it comes Ace, King, 6. You check. They're going to continuation bet the flop, often using a big size with a polarized range. They bet. With your 8-6, if it's suited, with a backdoor flush draw, you call. Otherwise, it's already mixing if we had the 8-6, right? So 8-6 already hates this. A pair, which is usually pretty good, already hates this. Say you call and the turn's a 2. You check. Let's say they bet again. They're usually going to bet big when they bet again. Notice 150% pot because the board's dynamic. Let's say they even go smaller, though. Let's say they only go 15. Notice your 8-6, without a flush draw, is folding. But that means, if you look at your opponent's strategy, look at these hands that are betting. 10-9, Jack 10, Queen 10. All of these hands are forcing you to under-realize your equity. Because the opponent's range is otherwise very, very strong when they take this line, right? They're betting with a lot of very good hands. And so this is going to result in you over-folding. So, for that reason, you don't get to defend the big blind all that often when you're playing deep stacked. What about if someone raises bigger to a bigger size before the flop? Well, you have to ask, are they raising with this same range? If they're raising this same range to a bigger amount, you have to defend tighter because you're getting worse odds. As your opponents raise bigger and bigger and bigger, you have to play tighter and tighter. What if someone raises too wide? Well, essentially, take a look at what happens when the cutoff raises. Well, let's say 26% of hands. Look at your strategy in the big blind. Pretty tight. Right? Notice lots of the offsuit stuff kind of hates it. Even a lot of suited hands are folding. Compare that to when the button raises and you're in the big blind. You get to play a little bit wider. Well, if your opponent plays wider and wider, you're going to call a little bit wider, and you're going to re-raise a little bit wider, primarily with just good, strong value hands that are suited, connected, etc. Pairs are going to re-raise wider, and hands in this region are going to be re-raising a little bit more. Right? You have to use a little bit of common sense when you're playing poker because while you could make a chart for every specific scenario, such as if the player on the button raises 75%, you're not going to know exactly how wide they're playing, and sometimes you're not going to know how tight they're playing. You have to use your best estimate. But you do always want to consider what your opponents do incorrectly. And as they raise bigger and bigger, you defend tighter and tighter. As they raise wider and wider, you defend wider and wider, often, well, usually 3-betting more often. Also, notice, when we do 3-bet here, we're raising to 12 big blinds. They make it 3, we're making it 12. You do not want to make it 6 or 8 or 9 or 10. Because when you do that, your opponent will then be getting very good odds to call. Notice when you re-raise to 12, they actually have to fold out a decent amount of hands. Now, you may say, my opponent's going to call all this stuff in blue. And if they do, great. Because remember, your re-raising range is very strong and you're going to extract a lot of value from these hands. Should you be re-raising bigger to like 20? Probably not, because then your opponent should fold a ton. And most people will correctly fold a ton to a 20 big blind 3-bet. Again, if your opponents are so bad that they'll always call, great. Just extract value with your good range, which, notice your re-raising range in red is already very, very strong in general. If you think they're going to call far more often than they should, maybe you don't 3-bet the bluffs quite as often, quote-unquote bluffs. Hands in this region. Just call these hands and 3-bet more good, strong, big cards. Again, use some common sense to take advantage of what your opponents do incorrectly. Okay? What else do we want to discuss? Number of players in the pot. Let's discuss that real quick while we're here. Say the cutoff raises to 3 big blinds with, this reasonable range, 26%. Again, if your players raise wider, you should defend as if they are raising with a wider range, right? Don't just presume every cutoff raises the same range. Say they raise, and now the button calls with these hands in green. Remember before, if the cutoff raised and you're in the big blind, you're folding 71%, okay? What if instead the button calls, the small blind folds? Now, you fold 79%. You're folding more often. This is something that confuses a lot of players. I didn't know this concept a long time ago myself. Because people think, okay, now I'm putting in 2 big blinds to try to win 3, 6, 9.5 minus the rake. I don't need to realize all that much equity, which is true. The problem is that if the cutoff's range is reasonable and the button's range to call is also pretty strong, right? You just don't get to defend all that wide. Because in this situation, you have to take your range against both the cutoff and the button, and you lack position. So even though you're getting good odds, you just don't love it. Now, which hands are folding out that would have otherwise defended? Right? If you take a look at this chart, you're going to find that a lot of the offsuit stuff gets out of the pot, and the junky suited stuff also gets out of the pot, right? Notice before we were defending a few more junky hands and a few more offsuit hands against the cutoff raise, right? Now, when it goes raise, call, fold, all the offsuit stuff folds, and all the offsuit stuff folds down here, and a lot of the junkier suited stuff folds as well. Now, it's not that big of a difference in the suited hands, but it is a big difference in the offsuit stuff. Offsuit stuff really does not like being multi-way. We'll see this displayed even more as we start looking at wider defending ranges, like in a tournament, when there's an ante and no rake. Also notice what happens to the re-raising range. The re-raising range gets very, very linear, meaning you're just re-raising the absolute best hands, mainly suited Broadway hands, ace king and ace queen, plus a few bluffs, right? Remember before, when cutoff raises, button folds, small blind folds, we're re-raising more junky hands in this region, right? Some weaker suited hands, some ace-x suited, etc. But when it goes raise and call, our re-raising strategy becomes very, very linear for the most part. One thing you will notice when you're playing deep stack cash games, ace-5 suited and 6-5 suited love to bluff. You want to re-raise the ace-5 suited and the 6-5 suited, and most scenarios from out of position, you're probably going to be okay. Notice here, cutoff raises, button calls, small blind, ace-5 suited, Say it folds, ace-5 suited and 6-5 suited. Say small blind folds, ace-5 suited, 6-5 suited. These are hands that very, very often get out of line. Okay, what next? We discussed as the raiser's range is wider, you defend wider, right? Because if they're under the gun, you defend really tight in a cash game. If they are really loose, you defend wider. Number of players in the pot, hands without implied odds go down in value when you're against a raise and caller. Structure of the game, raiser strategy. Again, if the opponent takes passive lines post-flop too often, defend wider, because you're going to be able to better realize your equity. Right? Like, say your opponent will never bet post-flop. Let's just pretend. If they raise and you call, the question simply becomes, does my hand have enough equity against my opponent's range to continue? Not that this is how the real world works, but let's take a look at a very simple scenario. In this situation, let's get out the calculator. We'll do some very basic math. You have to put in 2 big blinds, right? Facing a 3 big blind raise to try to win their 3, your 3, and the small blind, right? So that's 6.5 minus half a big blind rake, let's just say. So 2 to win a total of 6. Means we need to realize 33% equity. So let's give our opponent the 40% raising range on the button, roughly, right? Give or take, something like this. You can go over here on this tool called Poker Strategy Equilab. It's a free download. There's a paid one and a free one. You can go to Hand Range Calculator. Assuming your opponent never, ever, 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 ever bets after the flop, which again is not accurate. Here is what you can defend with. Almost everything. Now, why can you defend almost everything in this scenario? If the opponent's raising from the button and never checks down, compared to the situation that's happening in reality, where the opponent can bet post-flop. Well, because the opponent can bet post-flop, they're going to make you fold out stuff like pairs and ace high and king high and unpaired hands by the river when they take the bet line or bet check bet line or whatever. As your opponent can make you fold out equity, you in turn have to defend tighter and tighter and tighter. This is why, as we're going to see, when you're playing a tournament with very shallow stacks, you actually get to defend the big blind really wide. This is also something I did not know a long time ago. I thought, with a short stack, you got to be tight and conserve your stack. But that is not true at all. I learned this from David Peters, from studying him and rooming with him, maybe 12 or 15 years ago. Watching him play, he just defended the big blind almost every time against a raise. I'm like, what in the world's happening here when he was shallow stacked? And the answer is, you make a pair and then you don't fold. It's easy to not fold when you have 12 big blinds, right? You've been playing for 2 decades and you never met players that use ranges. Stu Unger, Doyle Brunson, Phil Hellmuth, Phil Ivey, do they use ranges? Of course they do. I know Phil Ivey does. He literally has a little course on this on Masterclass. He discusses ranges. Phil Hellmuth, yes, Phil Hellmuth understands ranges. Doyle Brunson, I haven't talked to Doyle Brunson about ranges, but I presume he is aware of the fact that his opponents have cards. I presume Stu Unger was also aware of the fact that his opponent has cards. They probably were really leaning on this concept. What is the player's strategy? Is the player going to be overly tight? Are they going to be overly cautious? Are they going to be insane? If you read Doyle's book, Super System, he literally talks about this. He talks about how when people re-raise, they usually have a really good hand, and you should fold. What does that mean? They have a good range, and you should fold. When they just call, they usually have a weak range. So you bet the flop, bet the turn, blast the river, and make them fold because their range is too weak, or they will defend it poorly, right? Now, he may not be using exactly the term range. I don't know when the term range came about. I remember a book by Cole South in 2003 or 4 or 5 called Let There Be Range. It was like $5,000 for this book. And I read it eventually when it became cheaper, but it was all about range analysis. And you have to realize that terms get generated as people discuss things more and more and more. So instead of saying all potential hands that someone could have within reason, you just say a range, right? Okay, let's now discuss how strategies are going to change. Let's look at a situation again. Button raises, small blind folds. This is what the big blind should call with. In a cash game, 100 big blinds deep. What if instead we're playing a tournament where stacks are a little bit shallower and the raise size is a little bit smaller and there's an ante in play? What percentage of your big blind should you expect to lose on average? It depends. As your opponents are worse and worse and worse, you should lose less and less and less of it. All right, now, button raises. Let's take a look at the strategy the button should use. They're raising 51% of hands in a tournament 80 big blinds deep instead of 40% in a cash game. You can raise wider on the button because there's more money in the pot proportionally, right? Remember, in a tournament, which is what we're looking at here, you can tell the difference. This says MTT here. This says cash here. So they're different charts. The opponent's now raising smaller. And because of that, you defend wider. Also, there's an ante in play. You should defend wider. Also, there's no rake. You should defend wider. All of this should lead you to defend wider with roughly the same stack depths. 80 big blinds versus 100 is pretty much the same in a tournament compared to a cash game. You think that defending the big blind too much is a mistake? Will your opponent let you realize your equity? Simple as that. As they will let you realize your equity better, you can defend wider. But take a look at the difference that slightly smaller raise size, ante, and no rake impacts your strategy. Now we fold 26% of the time in a tournament in those scenarios. I'm just going to refer to it as a tournament, compared to 62% in a cash game. So, again, button's range is tighter in a cash game, so you have to defend tighter. The raise size is bigger, so you're getting worse odds, so you have to defend tighter. There's no ante, so the pot's smaller, so you have to defend tighter. There's a rake, so the pot's smaller, so you have to defend tighter. All of that forces you to be way, 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 way tighter in a cash game compared to a tournament. However, this is the exact opposite of what you'll see a lot of people do, which is why poker is very, very profitable. You'll find a lot of time in cash games, people defend any 2 cards. They think, oh, it's just $2 more or $3 more or $6 more, whatever. And they defend really wide. They think in a tournament, ooh, I want to conserve my tournament life, so I'm going to play tight. But no, 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 no. You get to defend very, very wide in a tournament because you're getting really good odds. Notice the re-raising shape is actually kind of similar. You're re-raising the best hands in both scenarios, something like 9s and better, right? Notice 9s and better, maybe 8s and better even is re-raising a lot. Ace, Jack, Ace 10 suited, something like that's re-raising a lot, suited good hands. And then some suited connectors and some suited blockers in both scenarios. As the ranges get wider, like I discussed already, you're going to re-raise more often. We have 13% here compared to 15% here, right? But the suited hands that are re-raising get bumped down as your range gets wider and wider. As you see, they're sort of in this region here in the tournament, whereas they're more in this region here in the cash game. If the opponent's range was wider and wider, the re-raises would get bumped down even a little bit more. And you re-raise a few more hands here and a few more offsuit blocker hands here, and you'd call more offsuit junk. Okay? If your opponents don't continuation bet 80%-ish, well, they should be continuation betting different amounts in different scenarios. Do you get to defend more often? Essentially, as your opponent is more passive, you get to defend more often. I've said it again and again and again and again and again. Okay, cool. You understand this concept? Let's take a look at the under the gun range. Here, they should be raising 16% under the gun in a tournament compared to 11% in a cash game. So in a cash game, remember, you defend super duper tight against under the gun range, raising range. What about in a tournament? What do you predict? Do you think you're going to defend way wider, a little bit wider? Are you going to defend any two suited cards against a 2.5? Well, you actually almost do. However, the offsuit stuff's still pretty bad. As the opponent's range gets tighter and tighter, offsuit stuff goes way down in value quickly. But again, notice the drastic difference. In a tournament, because the raise is smaller, because there's an ante, because there's no rake, you defend much, much wider. As a general rule of thumb, against a 2 big blind raise, it's a 2 big blind raise, remember, a little bit smaller than the 2.5, you defend any 2 suited cards against just a raise when everyone folds around to you. Okay? That said, offsuit stuff gets way weaker. What if there is a button under the gun raise, folds around to the button, they call, and now you're in the big blind? Multi-way. Let's discuss the multi-way spot. Well, now you're going to fold a lot. Take a look at this. Why would you fold a ton against an under the gun raise and a button call? Well, remember, the button caller is calling pretty reasonable hands, right? This is a very good range. We already saw under the gun is a very good range. So if button calls, small blind folds, you don't get to play much at all anymore because now you're going to be very dominated across the board. This is, again, a concept that many people don't understand. They think, I'm getting good odds, I can call. No, 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 no. If you're against 2 very strong ranges, you got to be really tight. What about if the cutoff raises with this range, 36%, pretty wide, and then the button calls? Notice again, pretty good calling range. You get to defend wide now. A little bit wide, but again, the offsuit stuff goes way down in value. Offsuit stuff goes way, 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 way down in value when you are against a raise and a call, right? Always consider, though, is the raiser's range really wide to begin with? If it's not, if there's a raise and a caller, the caller should be pretty tight. Therefore, you're against a tight range and a tight range. You got to be really tight. If the cutoff's range is wide and the button's caller range is, slightly wider, now you can defend wider, right? And this doesn't really matter. The opponent's positions don't actually matter in the real world. What matters in the real world is how are my opponents playing? Because imagine the under the gun player raises with 36% of hands and it folds around to the button and they play perfectly. It's as if it's the cutoff versus the button raise, right? Or imagine the button calls with all sorts of trash. Now you're against a much trashier range in there, right? So if against a 36% range and a really trashy range, you get to defend even wider. That said, you have to be a little bit careful. Like say low jack raises and then the button calls, you see now, again, you have to be pretty tight, right? Because low jack should still be pretty strong, and the button should also be reasonably strong. So really, the only time you get to defend very wide with lots of suited stuff against a raiser and a caller is when the raiser is very wide and the caller is kind of wide, okay? It's tempting to defend those suited connectors always. I mean, look, if you told me you wanted to defend suited connectors and whatnot, I think that's like okay. You always have to ask, like, what would be, like, how bad could it be? Now, that's not necessarily a good logic, but defending a suited connector hand, even in a bad scenario, say under the gun raises, under the gun +1 folds, low jack folds, let's say the hijack calls, small blind folds. Oh, do we have a broken chart here? Maybe we have a broken chart. 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Did I see something wrong? Or did we did under the gun plus calls? Maybe my chart was screwing up. You got to be tight. Offsuit stuff's bad. Suited stuff's good. What was I looking at differently here? 1 minute. Maybe my chart's screwing up. Yeah, okay. Offsuit stuff's bad. Fine. I think I did this one. Did we have a broken chart? Oh, we do have a broken chart. Broken chart. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Where's my pen? We have a broken chart. It's always good to find broken charts. 80 UTG versus button. This is incorrect. This should be wider. Not a ton wider. Not a ton wider. It should be as if it's like this. Offsuit stuff's bad. Suited stuff's good. But not all suited stuff. Okay? Broken chart there. Anytime you find a broken chart, let me know. We are in the process of continuously making peak better. Sometimes there's a mistake. I hate mistakes, but messing around will help you find the mistakes. Okay, anyway, suited stuff's okay. I was gonna say, like, you can't go around folding suited connected stuff against a button call or a cutoff call. That would be too tight. But, good. Anytime you're studying anything, use a little bit of logic, maybe you'll find a mistake. That said, offsuit stuff's bad. Offsuit stuff's bad. Multi-way. Suited stuff's good. I'm actually curious now. Let's say call, fold. Okay, fine, whatever. Peek is peak. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Let's take a look at a different spot now. I want to look at when the button raises, small blind folds. Here's what we should do 80 big blinds deep in a tournament. What if we were now shallower? Let's go to a tournament, 8 max, in a 40 big blind deep scenario. Button raises to a smaller amount, small blind folds. Now we see a big, big, big difference. So why is there such a difference? Well, now stacks are starting to get shallower, right? We're down to 40 big blinds. The dark red goes all in. You may say 40 big blind all in. Yes, this is something that a lot of the best players are fully aware you need to be doing from out of position, because when you call, you're going to realize your equity somewhat poorly, right? Imagine you just call the ace-queen pre-flop, and the flop comes not with an ace or a queen. You check, they bet, you call, turns whatever, you check, they bet, you fold if you don't have anything. But ace-queen's very likely to be the best hand. So again, because you're out of position, you're going to under-realize your equity. Also notice which hands re-raise as a bluff. As stacks get shallower, you don't re-raise the suited connected stuff as a bluff anymore. Remember, 80 big blinds deep, this type of stuff is re-raising as a bluff. 40 big blinds deep, this type of stuff is re-raising as a bluff. You may say, why? Well, because as we get shallower and shallower, your opponent's going to be more likely to just go all in before the flop. And for that reason, your post-flop playability matters less. If you do re-raise to 9.2 big blinds here and they go all in, you call with your best hands, you fold your trash. All the trash is this stuff you re-raise down here. All this stuff that you re-raise is going to be folding out, right? Because it's all bad. You don't really want to be re-raising a hand like, let's say, Jack 10 suited or 10-9 suited or 9-8 suited, though, because when you re-raise that 40 big blinds deep and your opponent goes all in, you have to fold. But Jack 10, 10-9, 9-8, 8-7, all of these hands are actually really good. Notice when you re-raise deeper stack, your opponent calls a ton. They don't actually re-raise all that often, only 4.2% of hands. It doesn't And when you're in this scenario, they're going all in or re-raising a little bit more, right? Because as stacks get shallower, just winning the pot and realizing your equity is very nice. So because they're going to call more often as you get deeper, you want to be re-raising hands that have good playability. But when you get shallower, you'd rather re-raise hands that have blockers to your opponent's shoving range or calling range. So you see a lot of ace X, king X, and a few other weaker hands doing that. Okay? Also notice as you get shallower, all suited hands call every time. Let's say you're against under the gun raise, it folds to you in the big blind. All the suited hands call. 7-2 suit is going to be roughly break even against the under the gun. Over here, notice you defend a little bit more with a few more offsuit stuff. Not a lot, but a few, right? Notice the 8-6, 9-7, king 6 getting in there. Whereas over here, they are not in there as often. A little bit of a difference, but not a huge difference. But it is worth noting, right? Like 40 big blinds deep, queen 9, jack 9, 10, 8 call every time. They're mixing over here. So I think that's fine. Speaking of exploits, by the way, all these hands that are mixing between calls and folds, I usually just call because most people will continuation bet the flop kind of often. But then on the turn in the river, they usually don't bet the turn in the river often enough. And I think that lets you realize your equity or find good bluffing scenarios. All right. Now, let's take a look again at what happens if the button raises, small blind folds, you're in the big blind, and we are now playing 20 big blinds deep instead. So button raises to 2 big blinds now, even smaller. Small blind folds. Here we are in the big blind. 40 big blinds deep compared to 20 big blinds deep. Notice now we're folding only 15% of the time with the absolute junkers. You may say, why in the world are we calling wider as we get shallower? Remember, as you get shallower and shallower, you in turn are going to realize your equity better because if you make any pair on the flop, you're usually pretty happy. Also, take a look at what happens to the re-raising range. Well, now you're going all in with almost every ace-X offsuit, pocket 10s and lower, which makes logical sense. But then you're re-raising your best hands, right? Ace-Jack suited and better, jacks and better. A few suited connectors, by the way, if you do re-raise and they go all in, you're going to call off with those, right? If you did re-raise every once in a while with like the 10-8 suited, et cetera, not that you should do that. Oops. We do raise, we do fold, we re-raise, they go all in. You would call it off. So there are tiny slivers of re-raises with all these hands. I would not worry about that, though. Notice like 5s re-raises every once in a while, 4s every once in a while. You can see here, 3% of the time, right? Don't worry, don't get bogged down on that. But now your re-raising range, for the most part, is very polarized. Your best hands, a few suited connectors that have enough equity to call, because if you make it 6.6 and they go all in, you only need 33% equity to call, because you have to put in 13 to win 40. 13 divided by 40 is roughly 33%. And that allows you to call off with these. But then you re-raise with a few junker bluffs. This is something a lot of people never, ever, ever do. And it's a mistake. When the button raises with a pretty wide range, notice they get to raise with about 40% of hands total. They're going all in sometimes, but when they do raise, they are going to fold to a re-raise sometimes. If you make it 6.6, look how they should play. They should be folding out 52% of the time. Now, will they fold out 52% of the time? Probably not. If they won't fold out quite often enough, because they always call king jack, queen jack, king 10, suited connected stuff. If they're always going to call those hands, then you, in turn, don't get to bluff as often. But you should probably still bluff some, maybe not, but you don't know how your opponent's going to play. Because, for example, your opponent may just raise wider on the button. Say they raise all this junk like 9-8, 8-7, 7-6, queen 8, king 7, king 6, etc. They're going to overfold to the re-raise, which allows you to re-raise wider, right? Always consider your opponent's strategy. So anyway, if they play perfectly, small blind folds, notice you get to have some junker bluffs. And they're pretty bad hands. 10-5, 9-5, 8-4, jack 2, queen 2. You may say, what if I re-raise and they call and I miss on the flop? What do you want the flop to be? Let's look at a few flops. King, jack, 3. You're going to bet with almost everything, including the majority of your garbage. And when you bet, you're going to bet small because all your best hands are just really good. So they don't really care what odds they give the opponent. and all the trash wants to bluff as cheaply as possible. So notice you bet 3.7 big blinds only. Say they call. Say the turn's an 8. Do we keep bluffing with our trash? Well, probably not. Because now the trash has literally no equity, and once they call our flop bet, they probably have something pretty decent. Notice we only have half pot remaining. It is okay to 3-bet pre-flop, make a small bet on the flop, and then just give up. Okay? Notice here we have categories. When we are betting on the turn, we're really only betting with, quote-unquote, nothing with draws and bottom pairs and stuff like king 2 and king queen, right? Hands with decent equity, right? And you may ask, why do we even get to bet in this scenario? Well, I mean, look, really, we're not bluffing all that often. In this scenario, the out-of-position player has a little bit of an equity advantage at the top of the range, but just not at the bottom in the middle. And for that reason, you just got to be getting out of the way a lot of the time. What if you 3-bet and your opponent never folds? Well, you better come prepared with a hand. Duh, right? Go back to pre-flop. Stop bluffing. If your opponent always calls, use some common sense, everybody. If your opponent always calls your 3-bet because they're that horrible at poker, or maybe their range is really strong, who knows? If they always call, stop bluffing and 3-bet wider for value. You went all in with 8-5 offsuit in the small blind to try to steal the blinds. Well, you probably don't want to do that. You probably want to raise small or limp. 8-5 is not a particularly good hand to go all in with. You want to go all in with hands that block your opponent's all-in range. Let's just take a look at this. Very common strategy. 20 big blinds deep. It folds to you in the small blind. Look at the all-in. Hands that block the opponent's calls or have pretty good equity. Go all in, 20 big blinds deep. 8-5 offsuit limps. 8-5 offsuit does not raise, it limps. Assuming you're playing deep stacked, and you say you had the second biggest stack, and the big blind was the chip leader, that's the spot where, if anything, you want to be tighter. You want to be tighter. I don't know how many big blinds you have, but even if you have like 10, notice the 8-5 limps or folds. It does not go all in. That was a big, big, big mistake, most likely. All right. Let's look at 10 compared to 20. Folds around to the button, who min raises, 20 big blinds deep, small blind folds. We already take a look at that. Say 10 big blinds deep. Now, you have to ask, 10 big blinds deep, does the opponent go all in or fold, or do they min raise, go all in or fold? Notice you should still min raise some junkers 10 big blinds deep. Say they do min raise, small blind folds. You actually got to be really tight. You may say, why do you have to be really tight in this scenario? Didn't you just say defend any 2 cards against a min raise? Yes, but there are exceptions to the rule. Here's a very clear one. Notice what the raising range looks like. It's all really good hands and a few bluffs that aren't even that bad. So in this scenario, you actually have to be really tight when you defend the big blind. What if they had 15 big blinds instead, though, where they're going to be going all in way less often? So they have 15, folds to them. Notice now they're going to be raising way wider. If they raise small blind folds, now we're going to go back to a very wide defending range, right? And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where when they defend, or when they raise with a very tight range, for whatever reason, you have to defend really tightly, or much tighter. As they're raising a wider range, you get to defend far wider. Notice now you don't re-raise small with anything, because if you re-raise small off a 15 big blind stack to, let's say, 6, and they go all in, you have to call with basically everything. Because you're getting really good odds. Therefore, you don't get to have bluffs. Therefore, you just want to shove it all in with pairs, lots of ace-x, a few suited kings, etc. Okay? Now, post-flop, we could go through specific scenarios. If you are on peak GTO, make sure you check out the drills. We have all sorts of drills. You want to be looking at stuff like big blind versus low jack raise, big blind versus button raise, etc., etc., etc. Or you can go through the drill of the day, where we go through a specific spot. Me or one of the other poker coaching coaches, mainly me, Justin Sliba, and Brock Wilson, plus Aram Zobian and Matt Affleck here and there. But why don't we do this? Let's take a look at 40 big blinds, big blind versus the button raise first in. Okay? Please load. All right, start drill. Here we have it. Folds around to us. Folds around to the button. We're on the screen. We are. What do? We already know 3-2 suited. Calls 100% of the time. All suited hands call versus the button. Flop. Do we ever lead this flop? Now, we're not going to be discussing leads today too much because we're almost out of time. But you do want to lead on these middle connected boards some portion of the time, mainly when the initial raiser is from earlier middle position and their range is somewhat tight. You're not going to lead nearly as often against a button raiser because they're just going to have more middle cards compared to an under the gun raiser. So we're going to be checking this for sure. Check 100% of the time, as you see. If they bet, we're just going to fold. Now, imagine you wanted to study this spot. You can scroll down, right down here. Let's go right down here, and you can click right here. This is the take me to that scenario option. So I wanted to know, do we actually lead on this flop? And I'm going to guess we do not 40 big blinds deep all that often. And notice, we do not. However, what if, let's say, under the gun +1 raise and fold to us, and we call the big blind, and it comes this. Now notice we actually lead more often, 11% of the time. When you do lead, you lead tiny, by the way. You pretty much never lead big. So why do we get to lead more often against the under the gun raiser compared to the button raiser? Well, it's because the under the gun's range is all big cards, right? And notice these big cards, all these hands, don't really connect with the 8-7-4, whereas the button raiser raises all this middle connected stuff, which connects kind of well with that, right? By the way, if we were 20 big blinds deep, and it folds around to the button and they raise and we call the big blind and it comes 8-7-4, now we actually lead way more often. That's because stacks are shallower and we're going to realize our equity better. Notice, we actually rip it all in on this board some chunk of the time, 15% of the time, and we lead small way more often. And this is what I was saying, right? If we go back to this, stack depths matter, both pre-flop and post-flop, because the ranges change substantially. As ranges change, your strategy has to change as well. If we were against the under the gun +1 raiser and it folds around to us and we call and it comes the 8-7-4, we're going to also lead a lot. Now we're not going to be leading all in though because the opponent has lots of aces, kings, queens, etc. They can call it off no trouble. Now we're leading using the smaller size pretty much every time. Okay, let's quiz another one. 40 big blinds deep. Ooh, do we shove these pairs? Do you remember the chart we showed earlier? All in 55%, re-rated small 45%. Should they call it off with the ace-8 suited? What do you think? What do you think? Let's go over here. Let's take a look. Again, you can go through and you can study all these scenarios over and over and over until you get it right. So, button raises. We have the pocket fives. For simplicity, I'd probably just shove like nines and lower every time. I don't think it's that big of a deal. So we go all in. Do they call ace-8 suited? I think it's going to be close. And it is, hey, look at that, mixing. Ace-9 suited calls it off. Now, the question becomes, what should you do in the real world here? Well, you want to ask yourself, is my opponent shoving with this range? I think most people get this middle pairs here right. I think most people get the ace-queen, ace-jack, and king-queen right. I think they miss king-jack suited, queen-8 suited, 9-8 suited, king-7 offsuit, and ace-2 offsuit. I think most people do not shove those hands. So, using some logic, if your opponent does not shove ace-2, king-7, and queen-8, and 9-8 suited, how should that impact your ace-8 suited? Should you call it more often or fold it more often? Take a second, write it in the chat. If you're enjoying today's show, by the way, click the like button, click the subscribe button, click the notification bell. Well, if they're not shoving some hands you dominate, mainly ace-2 offsuit, and 9-8 suited, you should be more inclined to fold. So then the question becomes, how tight do you fold? You probably want to start folding out some of the bottom pips here, right? Because you're just dominating them a little bit less often. Okay? If they shove ace-king suited, ace-queen suited, well, then you definitely start folding out these hands in this region, right? So always consider the opponent's strategy. 10-9 suited, we literally just looked at this. Button raises, small blind folds, 10-9 suited calls every time 40 big blinds deep, right? Now look, what would happen if instead your opponent raises with a wider range on the button? They're supposed to raise 50-ish%, as you see. What if they raise 60% instead? How should that change your strategy? Well, in that scenario, you should be shoving more often and re-raising more often. So, using a little bit of logic, we want to widen our shoving range in all the scenarios where we're already shoving. So, small, medium pairs, maybe king, queen every time, maybe king, 7, and ace 2 every time, maybe 9, 8 suited every time, maybe 10, 9 suited. It's probably okay. I think a lot of people get really bogged down in like studying solvers and trying to like completely and accurately follow them. But use a little bit of logic, right? Take the aggressive lines a little bit more often, defend a little bit wider, and that's going to be fine. So if you told me in this scenario you want to shove the 10-9 suited, it's not going to be the best play against a GTO player, but it's going to be okay, right? That said, call every time. Flop comes ace-jack 7. Not particularly great. We're going to check every time. Now, they're going to bet this decently often, and we have a bad gut shot. This is a bad spot. Are 2s through 5s considered bluffs or value bets? It does not matter. Get that concept out of your head. You are shoving to fully realize your equity because these hands are quite good, but they are going to under-realize their equity from out of position. Don't think you're always bluffing or value betting. It's not how it works. You bet for more reasons than just for bluff or value. And to fully realize your equity is one of them. 10-9 suited here, I mean, gosh. I don't know what you're supposed to do, honestly. There's a lot of spots where, look, I'm just not going to know what to do. I would probably call, but I can be convinced folding or raising is fine. Call 95%. Good, we got it right. We turn the nuts. Ha, that's lucky. Does this ever happen for anyone in the real world? It doesn't seem like it's happened for me a lot recently. Seems like I just miss every time and have nothing. All right, I don't think we're supposed to lead. Check 99% of the time. If they bet, I think we probably just call. We're going to look that up. River's here. I think we want to bet big. We're going to have a lot of junk here, right? I mean, I would just pot it. I mean, look, we're probably going to mix this in reality, but I'm just going to pot it. Oh, look, it wants the small bet. It wants the small bet because the opponent's range is probably pretty weak. I get that. We're going to study this in a second. So obviously call, you have the nuts. Weird value shove. I don't even know what that is. Let's take a look. Like a weird bluff or something. GTO is funny. All right. On the flop, you really can't go around folding gut shots. In general, as a blanket rule, gut shot, can't go around folding. On the turn, if they bet, I think we should call. So let's see. On the turn, after we check, say they do bet 9. I would call the 10-9. But it looks like we were supposed to just shove it a lot. Okay. Let's say instead it goes check, check on the turn. On the river. So notice we are like I said, you're going to mix in these scenarios. It does, so let's take a look at this real quick. Notice, you should actually go all in sometimes with this hand. You also get to go all in with some ace-x, some bluffs. Weird strategy, right? Anytime it goes check, bet, call against a small bet on the flop, check, check, turn, when you have nuts in your range or effective nuts in your range, and apparently, actually, never mind. These do not go all in. These just pot it. What are we potting it on the river? Not a lot, right? We're potting it with the 10-9, or we're going all in with the 10-9, and then just bluffs, which is pretty savage. Lots of bluffs and 2 pairs. That's cool. Our bluffs are going to be hands that block their nuts, so mainly hand with a 9 or a 10, right? Using some common sense. So look, queen 10, queen 9, 10 6, 10 5, 10 4, etc., etc., etc. Okay. I kind of presume we weren't going to have a lot of shoves here. And to look, to be fair, we don't have a lot of shoves. If you told me you only wanted to pot it, I think that's fine. I, for simplicity, just don't really have a whole lot of 400% pot bets on the river. It's hard to implement those. So using common sense, even though I got the wrong answer, you can be kind of forgiving of yourself because essentially I would just pot it with the 10-9 and other, the logical bluffs. So whenever a lot of people are studying GTO, they're like, oh man, I messed up. And look, we did mess up compared to perfect GTO, but in a tournament, often there is merit in just surviving. So you don't necessarily want to be making too many gigantic bluffs, because one failed gigantic bluff makes you lose the tournament. So assuming we just remove this bet size, obviously that whole range would just be slotted into this. Fine, good, whatever. And the 10-9, when we do bet small, by the way, say we do bet 2.3. They're shoving some of this ace-x. I don't know about this. Like in the real world, I also don't expect that to happen. Oh, I'm sorry. Slow down. We bet small. So they had the ace-6 and they shoved. Notice they should do that like basically never. Here it is, ace-6 offsuit. They should do that almost never. It looks like every once in a while, but not really. Weird spot. Anyway, cool. We got it right. 10-2 suited, we call. Is because overbets are hard to balance in real life. While that is, they are hard to balance in real life. Also, what am I trying to say? You want to minimize going broke. How should we play our spade draws on that flop? Well, go back and study it. We're already past it. All right, bottom pair. I'm not sure if we raise here. I could be convinced raise is fine. If we were shallower, I think we want to raise way more often. I think here it probably calls okay. So call or raise. Fine. Turn 6. Do we ever lead this one? Do we ever have any 5-4? Do they have 5-4? This might be a lead spot. I could totally be convinced this is a small lead spot. I think I'm going to do it, actually. Please be right. Oh, 0%. -9 yellow. By the way, I have a rating up here. It'll go up or down based on how well or poorly you play. This river, probably got to check this hand, but who knows? Who wants to bluff this river? Torch this one. Let's take a look at this hand. Do we have any leads on this turn? That's what I want to know. Is that 6 good enough for us? Because we have all the 5-4. We raise a lot of the 5-4 on the flop. That's apparently our problem. Whenever you have a lot of the nuts and or top pairs, you lead. So here, it just wants us to lead never. All right. Fine. By the way, when you look at solver outputs, once you take a line that's just not used, the rest of this, you don't need to give it too much weight. All right, all in with small pairs like we discussed. By the way, you can get Peak GTO. Check it out at peakgto.com. Get in there, train, study. We get the pair, check every time. Do we raise this hand? So pairs and draws do raise some chunk of the time. This is a pretty good one with the gut shot. Do we call or do we raise? I'll tell you all something I struggle with here. I have a hard time knowing when to raise big in spots like this. I think we're supposed to just call most of the time, but I can be convinced to raise small is ideal. Raise big seems kind of crazy. So look, it does raise small every time. By the way, see how I lost almost no ELO rating, 0.43? That means the equity of calling, or the expected value of calling and folding, calling and raising are basically the same. Not ideal, but it is what it is. So we check call with a hand that should never check call. So again, the solver output might be a little bit funny here because we should never have this hand. Check. Obviously, we'll call again. 40 big blinds seems too big over 2.3 big blinds. Nope. Study your charts. Do we bet small on this river? Maybe. Nah, not quite. Oh, it hated this bet. Okay. So let's go over and study. So check raising the flop. That's what I want to look at, right? By the way, when you're playing scenarios out of position, you're going to screw up a lot. It's hard to play out of position. Do we ever lead the flop? Obviously not. We check. They bet. Notice the 5-2 suited raises basically every time. Cool to see. 5-4 is also going to raise a lot. And 3-2 is going to raise some. Right? Pairs plus draws that are very vulnerable to being outdrawn, like a 5, right? Because any overcard has equity. These are going to raise a decent amount of the time. Notice also lots of overcards to the flop with back, or to the 5 with backdoor draws are going to raise some too. These are going to be hard to find, by the way. I think it's probably okay to not find these or even these, right? And just like overload with the fours. Overload with the fours and the twos. So raise more fours and twos. I'd probably forget about the 8-6 offsuit. If the villain bets small, doesn't that allow you to raise big? Yeah, when they don't have a whole lot of nuts and you do. Like right here, right? Notice we never use the big raise size in this scenario, which is interesting to see. Pre-flop. 40 big blinds seems like too much to shove. Well, no. Remember, small pairs, 10s and lower, ace queen, ace jack, king queen, ace 2, and king 7. Shove those, assuming you're trying to play well. Okay. Queen 4 offsuit. Ugh. Call. Notice this re-raise bluff sometimes, remember? 40 big blinds deep. We flop nothing. We'll just check fold this one. Queen high, no backdoor is not good enough. Queen jack suited. Call. Remember, we don't re-raise this unless we're deeper stacked. 9-5-5. So we lead this sometimes because we have a lot of offsuit fives and they don't. Beware of that. Not with this hand, I don't think, because this is just garbage. Against the small bet, can we continue? We need to raise a lot on this flop, I think. Now, look, as you do lead more often, by the way, you check raise less often for the most part because you would have led with a lot of your good hands. I'm just going to fold this one, but I could be convinced calling's okay. Oh, call or raise. Horribly wrong. Too tight. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of you are going to be too tight, Jonathan Little included. I know it feels dirty check calling here, but you just have equity, and it's going to go check on the turn a lot, I guess. All right, on the flop, what do we lead with? Queen jack of clubs leads some. All right. We're actually leading big here some, which is cool, because we have offsuit fives and they just don't. All right, when we check and they bet small, notice we are raising a lot. What are we folding? I want to know what we're folding. We're folding cards without overcard, or hands without overcards, without 2 overcards. That's a hard one. If they bet any bigger, we can fold. They're not going to bet bigger, though. Notice they should bet small when they do bet. In GTO world, they should probably bet 1 big blind. So I would have messed this up. I would have played a little bit too tight here. And a good way to lose at poker is to overfold, because then your opponents just win with blind aggression. If your opponent bet bigger, then you can start folding out more hands, obviously. If I had a backdoor draw, I definitely would have called. Like, that's hopefully logical. It's a little bit too tight. You guess you missed my videos. Well, we're here right now. Maybe I missed the videos. Ha. We flop nut. We're going to check every time. I think we probably raise a small bet. Feels kind of bad to raise a small bet, though, just because we have a lot of equity. I'm going to raise, though. So mix between call and raise, mostly call, though. They just fold. Against small bets, by the way, you do raise a decent amount of the time. Already pre-ordered my new book. Hopefully it arrives soon. Well, it's not finished yet. I'm waiting for the editor. On the flop, they bet small. Take a look at what raise is. We're raising with a lot of flushes, 2 pairs, top pairs, and lots of junky flush draws. These are all junky flush draws here. Okay. When we do raise on a board that is very coordinated like this, where flushes are like almost always the nuts, or like 3 to a straight or whatever, usually going to be raising using a small size, even over a small bet. So that's a common rule. Okay. Looks like torching money OFR. I don't know what that means. You're going to find that while exploiting your opponents is ideal, very often you don't know what they're doing wrong. And I would venture to say, when you're playing in the small stakes games against players you don't know, you often aren't going to be aware of what they are doing wrong. It's always good to start with GTO strategies. So right here, I would say call 95%. Okay. Can't lead on the turn. Do we raise over a bet is the question. Ooh, a big bet. So, like right here, you have to ask, am I going to get worse hands to fold if I shove? I don't know. Feels pretty gross calling the queen high because a lot of the hands worse than ours will bluff the river, right? Look, I'm going to call, but I don't love it. This is also a spot where in the real world, going back to thinking about small stakes players, I don't think most people are bluffing here often enough. So if they're not bluffing here often enough, it becomes a straight question of, are we getting the right odds plus implied odds? While we're not getting straight pot odds to draw to a flush, we are getting good implied odds because most people aren't going to be so aware that the backdoor flush draw kills them. So I'm going to call, but notice fold is actually mixing. I'm not really folding. I think we get our implied odds. Do we bluff lead? No. Do we do anything besides check fold? No. Fold. Hope they have a bluff. No, just nut. With just nut, they of course call or shove. Now look, what I want to look at is what do we shove with on the turn? I don't think we shove a whole lot on the turn, but I want to see if that's the case. This is where you want to ask yourself these questions because this is how you go about studying. Do we actually shove a lot on the turn? And I think the answer is no, because they just have a lot of ace X that's going to call off. So when I check and they pot it, when they bet big, by the way, when they bet big, you raise rarely, just as a general rule. And notice we raise basically never. The draws that make sense to raise are our worst flush draws that have extra equity. So 8-5 of clubs, 8-7 of clubs, 10-7 of clubs, 7-4 of clubs. Makes a lot of sense. And then two pairs that are vulnerable. If you're playing 10 tables, it's hard to identify what people do wrong. So just play close to GTO. Yeah. Now, I would say get a heads up display if that's allowed on your site and obviously adjust according to that. Let's re-raise the queen 4 offsuit this time. Remember, we learned earlier, you do this about 12% of the time. Oh, God. Bet small, I guess. Bet small or a check. Might just be bad enough to give up. I think with no backdoor draw, we'd probably give up. Oh, man. Do we bluff this? Probably. Now, here you want to ask, do I have better bluffs? Better bluffs meaning hands with extra equity, hands with literally no showdown value. Look, here we have literally no showdown value, right? But we do have okay equity. We have a flush draw. We have a gut shot. I'm talking myself into a bluff here. Just because I don't really know any better hands to bluff with. And/or Season 2. When does that come out? That was a cool show. I'm going to bluff small with this, but I could be very wrong. So look, 86% bluff. This is a spot I think a lot of people don't bluff, but considering your range in this scenario, there's not a whole lot of better hands to bluff. I mean, sure, I guess you could have a 2 overcard hand, but we block Queen Jack for nuts, right? Which is always going to be in there, or often going to be in there. We got a 4 of hearts, so I think this is a good spot. Now, of course, we fold. Wow, it wants to call? Yeah, right. Not going to call. Don't call off in a tournament for your tournament life there. That'd be crazy. Now, I have a few questions about this hand. On the flop, we do a lot of checking because the flop is pretty good for the opponent, right? So we are checking some. That said, our junkers, especially with a heart, take a look at this, with a heart are betting small and often. Okay? Junkers with the heart are betting small and often, at least often enough. The queen of hearts likes to bet more than the 4 of hearts, though, okay? So say we bet, and they call. The turn is the 9. I have a question. Would we rather bet queen of hearts 4 or queen with the 4 of hearts? Because when you have the queen of hearts, you have more equity. Take a look at this. It actually does not matter, but it does look like queen with the 4 of hearts. Checks a little bit. So that's fine and good. So say we bet small. They really shouldn't shove all that often because our range is pretty good. They did shove, of course. So they go all in. It wants me to call off the queen of hearts with... so queen of hearts with the 4 makes sense because they're getting the right odds. I'm surprised it wants us to call off the 4 of hearts. That feels pretty nasty. Is this 40 blind stacks with no ICM? Correct. It is listed what is right here. If you're playing in ICM scenarios, you would use different charts. King 4. Do we 3-bet this ever? Let's call it this time. I think King 5 3-bets, not King 4. Do we lead? Probably not with this hand. Probably not at all, because they're going to have a lot of Jack X, right? Remember on the 5-5X board, we have a lot of 5s and they don't, that are offsuit? Here, they have a lot of Jack X offsuit. So look, we're facing the same weird junky spot. I think if we had the overcard to the 8 we call, I think we probably want to fold this, but if you told me to call, I wouldn't be shocked. Let's play a few more hands and we'll wrap it up for today. 7-6 suited. Do we shove this one? No. Call. Oh, do we lead this? Man, oh man. This is kind of like that other hand where I think we do want to lead a decent chunk of the time. Let's click lead. I could be wrong about this. I would naturally not lead this one, but sure. 3% of the time, we should actually lead bigger. Okay, cool. Do we check call now? They have a lot of ace-X. Let's try check. 28% check or bet big, just to try to get full value. They're going to bet a lot of ace-X, I got to presume. Ugh, terrible. Check. So now I got to presume we're going to mix all over the place. Let's try check this time, though. Oh, 0% check. It wants us to bet small. Okay. Now we, of course, raise all in. Ace-10, we stack, of course. Let's take a look at this one. So lead, should we lead the flop here? Okay, so something I'm already learning. 40 big blinds deep, we're leading big on the paired boards where we have all the trips and they don't. By the way, you can go through and train specific flops with the trainer. You can just, when you go to the trainer, there'll be an option for that. You can select specific hands and specific flops. So, flop, do we lead? We lead a pretty good amount, right? But when we lead bigger. Notice almost no small leads. Well, some small leads, but not a lot of small leads. On the flop, on the paired flop with a flush draw, we're usually often, we're betting bigger when we do bet. Fine, check. Turn. After leading, I opted to check. And it looks like we are mixing between check and bet. And I figured that because the ace is really good for them, right? If we look at our equities here, in positions equity is like kind of high across the board. That's the line in green. Our equity is in red. All of our bluffs on the flop just didn't get there at all. So all of our junk is just bad. So this is going to result in us doing a lot of checking. Okay. We discuss how to use these charts in pokercoaching.com in the tournament and cash game masterclasses. Okay, check. I'm surprised they check ace-10 here. I would have presumed ace-10 wants to bet. Yeah, so ace-10 does do a lot of betting. Okay. You got to realize GTO is going to mix perfectly, right? But in this spot, like even if they had ace-king, they're going to check every once in a while, 1% of the time or something, right? 2% of the time. But I would have thought a lot of the ace-X bets. And it does look like a lot of the ace-X does bet, so that's fine. So check, river, 4, and with 7-6, we don't really have 7-6 a whole lot here because we would have betted on the turn a lot, I guess. Well, what if we had a 6? So 9-6 mostly bets small. Okay, so why would we bet small mostly here? Equity graph will show you here. Notice we really don't have much of an advantage in general at all, really. So when you don't have much of an advantage, this portion of your range, like the decently strong stuff like an ace, doesn't really want to bet too big because sometimes you're going to run into your opponent's nuts, and your opponent will have nuts sometimes. So we are betting small with a lot of queens for thin value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And because we really don't have that many big bets at all, we just don't get to make the big bet. If we did bet big, it's going to be mostly... this thing's glitching out of me. There we go. When we bet big, it's mostly trips, right? Don't get too bogged down in this, though. Again, it's almost none of the range. Let's do one more hand and call it a day. Man, I could just play this trainer all day. 3-2 suited. Do me a favor. Click the like button. Click the subscribe button before we wrap it up. Bottom pair. On a flush draw board, do we check raise this? Probably not. We do raise it some. Okay. Bottom pair, bad kicker likes to raise. Everyone, bottom pair, bad kicker likes to raise a lot. Well, often. Not a lot, but often. Probably don't lead here because they have lots of spades. And we'll just fold to a bet, I presume. Check. Do we bluff river? I like how they throw me a rough one to end the day. So the problem is they're never going to fold a spade. But we need to have some bluffs. So which hands make the best bluffs? Oh gosh, the best bluffs are probably going to be hands that block their check. No, block their turn betting range, but that's going to be a lot of junkers. I don't know. It's a weird one. I mean, all in seems kind of insane, right? Because they will just have some spades sometimes. The problem is if we check, we just lose the pot. Maybe we're supposed to call, but we make some mixed calls with everything. Who knows? I mean, I don't know what we're supposed to do. I would go with pot here, I think, but I could be convinced check's better. All in might be right. I don't know. Let's try pot, please. 0%. Oh, I wanted 6.1. Fine. So that's a spot where you should be very forgiving of yourself. Look, they call the king 6. So when you are in that scenario and you look at that solver output, I thought we were supposed to bet that hand a lot for a pretty good amount. You don't want to bet small because they're just going to call every time. So right here, I wanted to know what should we bet. We should be betting very, very often. This is a spot where when it does run out a chop, you usually just do a lot of betting. So if we did bet 6.1, did they fold much of anything? Some. Not a lot, but some. 26%. This is a spot where in the real world you have to ask, will my opponent fold a chop? Some people fold a chop every time. Some people fold a chop never. If they'll never fold a chop, well, certainly don't bet big. If they'll always fold a chop, though, you want to bet an amount that will ensure they fold the chop. It's a weird hand. I want one more. Queen 10 suited. Let's call pre-flop. Do you all just sit and play with a trainer all day, every day? I mean, I know I do. Do we lead small on this one? I could be convinced that's fine. Do we have any offsuit threes? Take a look at our pre-flop range. Do we have any offsuit threes? We got some. We got a lot of suited ones. I'll say we can lead this. Sure. Do we lead bigger? Have we learned anything? Or have we learned something that doesn't apply? This is the tough thing about studying with only the solver without feedback from a good pro, is that we learned a heuristic from 2 different hands today. Low paired boards with a flush draw, we lead big. When we lead. Does that apply here? Probably. By the way, drill of the day is super good for spots like this, where the pros go through specific scenarios. Like in this, what do we do when we check they bet the flop? What do we do? Do we raise or do we call, et cetera, et cetera. And then we explain why, and usually give a very clear heuristic. This is a weird spot. I'm going to say we raise to 4, or bet 4. 0%. Got it wrong. Small paired boards like small bet. Incorrect. We already saw that's different. Just like, well, it passed me because I want to replay this. All right. We call. We're going to check the flop. Check flop. I want to see if we have any leads here. Maybe this hand's just like way too good to lead. If they bet, do we raise? Probably. Turn, we should bet medium, I guess. 0% again. Wants to bet huge or check. It's going to torch my ELO rating right here. All right. Good to torch your ELO rating at the end of the day. Please have more cash game drill of the day. Well, they're coming. All right. What do we lead the flop? I guess we just don't lead the flop a lot because we don't have all the offsuit threes. Okay. You want to have a lot of the offsuit threes to lead. So we do lead some, but it looks like this queen 10 suited is just too good. Notice, though, look, we were almost there. We were almost there. When we do bet, 40% pot is used primarily. We were almost there. Our hand's just a little too good. We bet using the bigger size. So we had the heuristic right. We just our hand was just a little bit too good. Like notice Jack 8 of diamonds bets big. 10-8, 9-7, right? Wait. Yeah, okay, we're on the right node. Okay. If we check, say they do bet small, do we raise or do we call? Our hand might be too good to raise. Notice we just call most of the time. Hand's too good to raise. Okay? Worth noting. If we do call, and the turn is a 5 of spades, do we ever lead? Or 5 of hearts, do we ever lead? Looks like no. So say we check. If they bet again, they're going to bet big this time. Yeah, they pot it. And we already learned, in this spot, we call. We do not shove because we don't really have a whole lot of shoves against the big bets on the turn. Right? Hands that like to shove here, just hands that are almost always good but vulnerable. Plus a few low flush draws with extra equity. So we see the 4s, the 7-2 suited. Does that make sense? Cool. Hard stuff. That's it for today. This is the quote-unquote perfect way to play the big blind. I know it's hard, but you got to practice. You got to study. You have to always work hard to improve your skills. I spend time every day drilling. I still get stuff wrong. All the best players in the world spend a lot of time drilling specific scenarios like this over and over and over again. You should go through and drill specifically low paired boards. You'll see you probably lead more often on the 5 than you do the 3, for example, when it comes to x5-5 compared to x3-3, because you have way more 5s, right? Good stuff to learn. As you study these scenarios over and over and over again, you're just going to get better and better and better. Again, though, recognize your strategy is going to change a lot based on the structure of the game, the stack depths, the number of players in the pot, the razor's range in general, and the razor strategy. Cool stuff. Good luck in your games. Have fun. Click the like and subscribe button again. We also have a few webinars coming up this week on YouTube and on pokercoaching.com. Make sure you check those out. Thanks again. Good luck. Check out peakgto.com. That's the best way to drill. Go to the drill of the day. Go through those. Go through specific scenarios. You should always be drilling spots that come up a lot, like button versus big blind, or cutoff raise versus button 3-bet, or button raise versus small blind 3-bet, or button raise versus big blind 3-bet. Go through scenarios that occur a lot. If you plug leaks in the scenarios that happen a lot, yeah, you may not get the tricky scenarios right, but those don't come up all that often at all, and that will result in you playing well in all the common spots. Thanks again for being here.